All right. Hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to have you all here. It is just 10:01 Pacific time, and so we'll just wait a couple of minutes to let the rest of the folks join us here today, but just letting you know that we are here and we are ready to get started in just a second. So while we all wait, what I'll do is I'll ask that everyone who is currently with us add your organization name and then also your pronouns to your name. In case you don't know how to do that, there should be 3 dots at the top right corner of your box where your video shows up, and there you can use that to rename yourself. So you can select that, add in your name, add in your organization, and then also add your pronouns. I'd also like to share that we have enabled closed captioning for this webinar. And so if you're interested in having closed captioning show up for you, there should be a control box along the bottom of your screen that says show captions. It'll ask you what language you would like to see captions in. So you can go ahead and enable captions there. And then finally, before we get started, I'd like to note that this webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording afterwards with participants and likely post to websites as well. So just be aware that our webinar today is being recorded. So I think we'll just go ahead and jump right on in. As a last measure of housekeeping, I'd like to just share that we are going to kind of be pressing through. We have a lot of folks joining us today, and so we're going to be pressing through our presentations. And so as we go along, you can go ahead and drop questions into the chat and also in the Q&A throughout the course of the webinar. We'll hold questions until the end, and then we'll have an opportunity to read off those questions and answer, hopefully, give some time at the end to answer any questions that folks might have who have joined us for the day. So I think given that, we will go ahead and get started. And while we are waiting for folks to join, what we'll do is we'll start with our first poll. We'd like to get a good sense of who is in the room today. And so we are going to launch our first poll of the day. There's going to be one more throughout the course of this webinar. But this one, we'll just ask a quick question to ask who is in the room. So if you could just go ahead and respond to that poll. All right, and so as we're collecting the final ones of those poll responses, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started with an introduction to our presenters today. So I guess I should start with an introduction of myself. My name is Diana Rodriguez, and I am the VP of Programs and Strategy with EveryoneOn. EveryoneOn is a national nonprofit organization that is here to unlock opportunity by connecting families in underserved communities to affordable internet service and computers and delivering digital skills training. We've been in practice and in existence for over 10 years now. I myself have been in the digital inclusion space for about 12 years now as well, mostly working in California, at the local, regional, and statewide level. And I'm just really thrilled to be here with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to Miguel Leon, who's joining us today with the 20mm Foundation. Who'll give us a little bit of an intro to himself as well as to the 20mm Foundation.
Thank you, Vienna. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here with us. Super happy to be part of this conversation today with EveryoneOn. Huge fans of their work. As Diana mentioned, Miguel Leon, Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives with Michelson 20mm. And our foundation is dedicated to supporting, investing in leading organizations, technologies, and initiatives that seek to transform learning and improve access to educational opportunities that lead to meaningful careers, specifically for underrepresented students. Our foundation has been around for about a decade. And our foray into digital equity work started a couple years back, and just grateful to be in community with folks that have been in the space for a lot longer, that are sharing their wisdom, their perspective, their hard work with us to try and advance systemic change for folks in need. So happy to be on the call.
Thank you so much, Miguel. We'll pass it over to Cristal.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Kristen Mojica. I go by she, her. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Digital Equity Initiative at Michelson 20mm. I joined earlier this year. The Digital Equity Initiative operates through a few different mechanisms, including advocating for the creation of legislation on digital inclusion, convening other philanthropic stakeholders in a pooled fund, which I'll talk about more later, and scaling initiatives that are working to eliminate the digital divide. For my own background, prior to joining the foundation, I was a program manager at the Anita Borg Institute, which recently was rebranded as the AnitaB.org. And I managed a scholarships program for underrepresented students of STEM and BIPOC women in technology.
Thank you so much, Cristal. Now we're going to pass it over to Gladys. Gladys, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Gladys Palpolatok. I am currently with NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. It's an agency under the Department of Commerce, and we are administering the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act dollars, otherwise known as IJA sometimes. I have too many years in digital equity work, have been long-time partners with EveryoneOn. Previously, I was with the California Emerging Technology Fund, whose mission is to close the digital divide. And it's exciting to go now to the federal level and be a part of this national program, but working in California primarily. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. And so wonderful again to be working with you and seeing you again. And then lastly, we'll pass it over to Paulina. Paulina, can you go ahead and introduce yourself as well, please?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Paulina Chavez. I am Senior Director of Programs and Special Projects at EveryoneOn, based out of Los Angeles, California. And in this role, I support the implementation of our programs and services in Los Angeles, California, as well as help move forward our advocacy and policy plan as we see, all of this engagement around digital equity. So super excited to be here with you all this morning and share more about our learnings from how to build digital inclusion capacity.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Paulina, and to all the rest of the panelists. There's one more person that I'll introduce just by name here. On the controls, we have Russell Hartley, who is also with EveryoneOn supporting us in the delivery of this webinar. So thank you so much, Russell. So why are we all here? Well, actually, just before we do that, I'm seeing the responses to the poll, and it looks like we have a good split of folks who are new to digital inclusion, a split of folks who are with a digital inclusion program, nonprofit or library, and then we have some folks from local, state, and government staff. A few folks selected other, which I'm sure actually represents a large part of the group of folks who we're hoping to capture with this capacity building type of training and strategy that we're looking to set in place. And so it's wonderful to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us in today's webinar. So, like I mentioned, I'd like to just get into an intro as to why we are here today. So just over a year ago, Congress passed President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was, as many will describe, a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure and competitiveness. This law will deliver $65 billion to help ensure that every American has access to reliable high-speed internet through a historic investment in broadband infrastructure and deployment. The legislation will also help lower prices for internet service, help close the digital divide so that more Americans can afford internet access. And so we are here in support of that, in addition to, in support of so many other investments in the digital inclusion space. For those of us who have been working in digital inclusion for a while, we have been watching and listening with bated breath to all of this so that we can really get started in all of this work. And but there's what this investment also means is that there is going to be a subset of folks, a group of folks who are going to be joining us from outside of the digital inclusion space as well. Folks who might want to ramp up or get started with digital inclusion practices, programs, strategies within their communities who haven't traditionally worked with those communities. And we want to be welcoming. Those of us in digital inclusion want to be welcoming to those organizations, because it's going to take all of us to get ourselves in the right place to actually close the digital divide, to make sure that we are all successful, that we're all lifting each other up, and that every dollar that gets infused into the United States through this digital inclusion work or for this digital inclusion work is successful in helping to connect those millions of Americans who are currently not connected. And so, so what this means for us is that we're positioned in a unique spot to be able to provide training and support to those organizations who are entering this space, and hence this capacity building through working with organizations who have not traditionally participated in digital inclusion programming. So that's what we're here to talk about, is to share this strategy and how it can help make a meaningful change within communities. We also want to share best practices around running these types of programs. EveryoneOn has run these programs for a number of years now. We are proud to be able to help folks stand up digital inclusion programming within their communities. So we'd like to share some of those best practices with you all. And in addition to that, the 20mm Foundation, the Michelson 20mm Foundation has provided us with a Spark grant that allowed us to undertake this very important work. And as a part of that, we'd like to share with you a product of that Spark grant that was given to us to put together a report that just shares, again, some of those best practices. And in addition to that, a toolkit for new digital inclusion practitioners to be able to use and develop programming and strategies within their community. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And so given the scope of our conversation today, we want to launch poll number 2. Which will just give us a sense of what folks who are here are hoping to learn from today's conversation. So if you could just take a moment to respond to that poll. And the questions are, or the question is, what are you hoping to learn? To learn how to design a successful capacity building training, to learn more about digital equity and why it matters, to find out how to support digital inclusion efforts, to learn best practices for running successful funder nonprofit partnerships, or to learn other things, which we'd love to hear about as well. So we'll wait for just a second as we see those responses. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and today, this morning, when I woke up, we had a nice dusting of snow on the ground. So trying to keep warm. Gladys, I saw you taking a sip of your tea there, or coffee, and it reminded me of trying to stay warm out here in Portland, Oregon. I hope everybody is also staying warm as we're heading into the holidays. All right, I think our poll should be wrapping up soon. And it has, and our response is here. We have actually a really good split. So we've got a majority of folks, 47%, who would like to learn about how to design a successful capacity building training, an equal amount of folks who want to find out how to support digital inclusion efforts, and learning best practices. So it's kind of split across the board, with some folks as well who would like to learn other pieces. We'd like to hear about those pieces as well, maybe through the Q&A or the chat. We'd love to learn what you'd like to get from this. So thank you so much for your participation in the poll. What we are going to do first, as we get started in some of the meat of the content for today, is we will hear from Gladys Palpolatok about what's happening at the federal level. And so Gladys, as she mentioned, is with NTIA, and she's prepared a few slides for us today to tell us about what's going on at the federal and state level.
Yes. Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much for inviting NTIA to participate in this. It is really an exciting time in the broadband space for digital equity. And it's unparalleled. I mean, those of us who've been in this space are, over the moon for the amount of funding that is available today. So it's an opportunity. It's an amazing investment at the national state levels. And there's a lot of work to be done. Sometimes when funding opportunities like this present themselves, it's kind of a competitive structure that happens with our organizations, but I think in our eyes, there's so much work to be done, both on the infrastructure side and in the adoption of broadband on the equity side, that it really will take all hands on deck, as EveryoneOn and the Michelson Foundation have said. And it's great to have this kind of preparatory discussion to help folks get their mind around what digital equity is, as well as what it takes to do it yourselves or with partners, and what funders, what critical role funders can play in all of that. So it's an unprecedented time. So anyway, as I said before, my name is Gladys Palpolatok. I'm with the NTIA. My first slide here shows kind of the map of where funding is in California. Excuse me. I'm going to switch over to my screen. Where funding is in California, and the two state agencies that are administering those funds. They are the California Public Utilities Commission, or the CPUC, and the California Department of Technology, or CDT. On the left side, in the white boxes, are the California Broadband for All programs. And on the right side, in the red boxes, are the Federal Internet for All programs from IJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. My focus today are on those red boxes. I'll be giving an overview of BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, and the State Digital Equity Planning Grant. Diana started off with that, so this is just a little deeper dive. I'll also be talking about how they're rolling out in the state, in California, and how you can engage and prepare as they're implemented. Next slide, please. Thanks, Russell. BEAD, as you can see, is 42.45 billion of the 60 billion that Diana had already mentioned. All 56 states and territories have opted in to participate in this funding, and have all now received their approval for further planning grants. So we're really in full swing here at the end of the year. And so in the new year, implementation of that will begin. In California, BEAD will be administered by the CPUC, again, the California Public Utilities Commission, and is primarily for deployment projects. Any remaining funds from those deployment efforts can then be used for digital equity, which may happen in some of the smaller states where deployment isn't as big an issue. But in California, we're not anticipating that happening because the state, as we all know, in California is so vast. Deployment is a major barrier, particularly in rural California, but also in urban core low-income communities. State allocations in BEAD, excuse me, will be based on the new FCC broadband availability maps, which are now available. They were released on November 18th. You can review them and also submit individual challenges to address level data that you see that are inaccurate. So we really encourage everyone to check that out. Literally share it with your family, your friends, and colleagues to give the FCC feedback on the accuracy of that map. And that's really important because state allocations for these NTIA grants will be based on the maps and are going to be announced by the end of June 2023. In 2023 will be an intensive planning stage, a year-long planning stage to engage stakeholders and develop a 5-year plan and initial proposal before implementation of the program in 2024. The CPUC anticipates that this will go through their kind of regular rulemaking procedure for implementation and to begin grant solicitation. Next slide, please. Thanks, Russell. On this slide, you'll see information about the Digital Equity Act. Its funding will be administered in California by CDT, the California Department of Technology, for state planning and capacity building, which is intentionally for both BEAD and DE, really intentionally intensive for the first year because it is a 5-year plan and very comprehensive. They, both organizations for both grant programs will be doing asset inventory as well as engagement of stakeholders to really do a deep dive as possible so that the 5-year plans will be as comprehensive as possible in order to cover and get everybody in California connected. State allocations for the state digital equity plan were determined by formula and that you can find in the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. CDT is now in the 1-year planning phase through, again, 2023 to develop the state digital equity plan with input and feedback from subject matter experts and communities like yours throughout the state. A state planning group, 6 outcome area working groups, approximately 20 listening sessions for engagement, and a survey are being planned now. Those are the different ways that you can get involved. The competitive program on the far right, top right-hand corner of the slide will be grants for digital inclusion efforts and are anticipated to be released in somewhere in mid-2024. So you can see that there is time now to prepare for those grants. I'll be sharing at the end of, on the last slide, links to the CDT status updates and how to participate in the state digital equity process so that you can sign up for staying in the loop as well as sharing that link with others. in your organization and in your community. Next slide, please. On this slide are, maybe preaching to the choir here, but on this slide are digital inclusion activities that lead to digital equity in communities. Again, the digital equity is the goal of achieving parity and digital participation in the economy and society, and really is what we're trying to achieve here, right? I think we all know now, because of the pandemic, how critical it is to have equity in this space in order for all of us to participate meaningfully and substantially. Our presumption before the pandemic, I think, was that everybody is connected, and that's true to some extent. However, like we knew before the pandemic, in particularly in incomes of poverty and disadvantaged communities, that connectivity was inadequate and insufficient, and then also in rural communities that sometimes was impossible. So that's really what we're trying to achieve here. These are on the page are examples of components that can be integrated into your work, or to find partners in your communities, partnerships with organizations to provide the full array of digital inclusion services that your community needs. So there are different parts of this that, you know, some other organizations that you are aware of may be able to serve where you cannot. There are CBOs, or community-based organizations, trusted messengers, that are one-stop shops, but there are others that partner and work together to provide wraparound services to achieve digital equity for their families and communities. And that really is where the opportunity is either looking at these components and seeing how you can fit them into your organization, or find partnerships throughout your community where others can provide the service and come up with a wraparound service for families to achieve that digital equity in your communities. Next slide, please. Although infrastructure is often at the forefront of broadband conversations, digital equity is at the heart and the goal of both NTIA programs, and has to lead both the BEAD and state digital equity planning efforts. This slide demonstrates that, and the role the critical role local coordination plays to achieve that. Now, once again, now is the time to prepare and develop your plans to build your organizational capacity in anticipation of these funds, and to find partners, if necessary, to work with and to work towards digital equity in your communities. The administration's goal with these funds is connecting 100% of all Americans, a lofty goal, but something that's really necessary for our competitiveness, as well as for equity. And this is as Diana already said, this is a once in a generation opportunity and investment that we think is really important and necessary. And last slide, please. I'm happy to answer any questions if there's time, Diana, at the end. And we want to thank you again, and please don't hesitate to contact us. My contact information is there, and literally it is my role to answer any questions from anyone. So we really appreciate the time, Diana, and everyone on in Michelson. So we look forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gladys. And I know that you could have spent an hour just on that topic alone, with so much information to review, for sure. But, you know, that was a quick and concise summary of what's going on at the federal and at the state level. So thank you so much for that. I think one of the things that you mentioned is super important, is just to look to local organizations as you're looking to get started within the digital inclusion space, to see, you know, where you fit in, right? So what services are being provided, what's already happening and how your organization can complement to make sure that we're all working toward digital equity within our community. So thank you so much. Also, there was actually, I'll get to that in just a sec. We'll transition from here over to Miguel, who will share a little bit about the Michelson 20mm's investment in capacity building and how that all originated and why you decided that this was a great idea to invest in.
Thank you, Diana. I appreciate it. When we first hopped into the digital equity space, it was right about when the pandemic hit, and along with a bunch of other foundations, philanthropic organizations, we responded rapidly and did the sort of device hotspot partnership with a local school district, with the LA Community College District. And we thought it was a great partnership, connecting LACCD students to the internet, to devices, to be able to continue their studies. We thought it was important. But as we did a lot more digging and chatting with, practitioners, community leaders, nonprofit organizations, even sister foundations, we realized that, this issue existed pre-COVID. It was exacerbated by COVID, and more needed to be done. And so we began to see the intersectionality of digital inequity. If you aren't connected to broadband, if you do not have a device, if you do not have the skills to access the internet or navigate the internet, health resources are out of your reach, educational resources are out of your reach, participation in our democracy is out of your reach. And so we began to explore different ways of really chipping away at the different facets of this really complex issue. And we felt that partnering with EveryoneOn was extremely important. One, because of sort of the history that you all have within the digital equity space and the access, I think, that you all possess in hopping into communities throughout the state and being a trusted actor in different regions of California to send a message to some of the most digitally redlined communities. Hey, you can access these resources, you can access these services. Let us give you the tools and resources to do it. And oftentimes that message is missed by poor communities of color because the EveryoneOn's reach, or even the nonprofits that they're used to working with in their local community, might not have had the depth of knowledge as you all had. So we figured, why not empower EveryoneOn to share their skills, to share their knowledge, and build capacity at other nonprofit organizations who are those trusted actors in different communities and different neighborhoods throughout the state, to be able to disseminate this knowledge, to disseminate the access to much needed resources, especially in a critical time, especially when there was a big shutdown, especially when folks were feeling the pinch in these communities. A lot of the folks that live there, are folks that were in the public sector, that were working in restaurants, or were working, jobs that were sort of on the front lines. And so they needed these resources to be able to subsist, to be able to, again, access, health resources, education for their kids as well. Absolutely critical. Households where, there's 4 or 5 multiple people joining the internet and needing to, really continue their lives despite the pandemic. So we felt it was critical. We felt it was extremely important. And beyond this partnership, we felt it was critical to galvanize our own field. And I know Cristal is going to hop on in a little bit and chat about some of the collective philanthropic action that we've taken, and sort of the bringing together of the philanthropic community that we've been spearheading along with a couple of other folks in the space. But I think just the intersectionality of the issue and the desire to spread the resources and knowledge that you all have with some of the critical trusted actors in community is why we decided to hop into the space.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's wonderful to hear a funder's perspective on exactly why this work is so important and how it makes a difference in being able to kind of take this digital inclusion work to scale. So thank you so much. What we'll do now is we'll pass it over to Paulina, who's going to share a little bit about the program and what was completed and share some best practices as well.
Thanks, Diana. So let me just go ahead and get myself set up here. But as you've heard a number of times today already, is that there, especially during the pandemic, a lot of organizations engaged in digital equity work out of necessity because, you couldn't access COVID testing at the time, right, without doing something online because we were all of a sudden at stay-at-home orders. We couldn't move in person. Distance learning came within 1 to 2 weeks of the declaration, and students all of a sudden had to start engaging in an online environment. And so organizations supporting all of these different types of missions had to kind of do digital equity work or found themselves not knowing what resources were available. And so, kind of jumping into the foray. And so this project was super beneficial for us also as well to make sure that I often get a question about whether we're in competition or with other digital inclusion organizations, and that's never the case. I always say that it's all about collaboration. As much work as EveryoneOn and other digital inclusion organizations do, we are just one. There are millions of people. 52 million people right now are still not connected to the internet, and unfortunately, we can't do it alone. And so we need everyone to jump in. So providing capacity building training to diverse organizations is going to be a really key part of how do we really leverage all of this federal and state funding coming down the pipeline. So, for you all to get kind of a basic understanding of what we did in this project is, we had about 18 different organizations that represented areas such as Los Angeles, the Greater Bay Area, and even some with regional and statewide reach who, we wanted to understand where they were coming from as well, what kind of digital equity work, if any, they had been doing. So this is just some of their responses, and you can see that quite a few weren't doing anything or couldn't, perhaps didn't have the capacity to do anything around digital equity work, but a majority of these respondents did. So the responses of what they were doing were varied. Some of them were actually delivering digital skills training. I remember speaking with partners who would, over the phone, teach people how to access Zoom to support this children's distance learning, or over the phone, teaching people how to sign up for COVID testing appointments, so on and so forth. So there were also, you saw a lot of advocacy around digital equity, making sure that people had access to those hotspots and those computers. I imagine the state of California might not have moved so quickly to purchase, millions of devices and hotspots to distribute, if not for advocates and folks on the ground who were really raising up this need, as well as some folks were just kind of rolling up their sleeves and signing people up for low-cost offers. I'm sure many of you remember there were some initial offers from internet service providers of free internet as an initial stopgap when we weren't really sure how long the pandemic or how long the stay-at-home orders specifically were going to last. And so, we saw that the organizations we were supporting through this project were kind of running the gamut in terms of digital inclusion activities that they were undertaking, even though their organizations themselves did not identify as digital inclusion focused organizations. And so what is our training? What we ended up developing, of course, with the support in the Spark Digital Equity Grant from the Michelson Foundation, was a really robust curriculum that was delivered primarily over Zoom, because this was, unfortunately, in-person uncertainties around continued COVID pandemic limitations have made it a little bit difficult, but about 6 hours of content were delivered to these organizations, excuse me. And we tailored it to each of the different organizations we were serving to make sure that they saw the relevance between, our work and theirs. As Miguel mentioned, there's a lot of intersectionality around different outcomes. And so we wanted to really highlight that. And these are some of the main topics that we primarily cover in what is now our digital communities training. So one is, what is the digital divide? Let's talk about the numbers. Let's talk about the statistics, but also let's talk about what we're all collectively seeing on the ground. Secondly, what is currently available? As I mentioned, there are low-cost offers available for devices, internet service, and now, if you weren't already aware, there's a program, federal subsidy program. I think, Gladys, you might have mentioned it, called the Affordable Connectivity Program that provides a $30 subsidy on internet service, right? So making sure that people are aware of these resources so that their clients and constituents are able to leverage and access them. For those organizations who really were interested in launching their own programming, we talked about curricula and some of the resources that we've used to build out our own programs that they could also leverage. So if you're familiar with North Star Digital Literacy, the Microsoft LinkedIn Learning platform, Google also has a really robust digital skills curriculum. So we shared best practices and tips on how to develop and create their own digital skills curriculum that would be tailored to the needs of their clients. And then one I want to point out is what are some other digital inclusion resources that might be available. Diana mentioned, previously that it's important to make sure that you're connecting with the community that you serve and understanding what's already there, so that we're not necessarily just duplicating efforts, that we're kind of really engaging and making sure that it reaches the most amount of people. And so, we had a whole section in our training that really jumped into this. There were also, we also took some time on talking about how to implement these efforts. What does the landscape around policy advocacy look like right now, if that's what the organization wanted to focus on? And then, of course, strategies for outreach specific to digital inclusion, because the way you talk about digital equity and the digital divide really impacts how people understand whether or not that's something that they're being afflicted by. So one of the things I wanted to highlight here at our webinar was, as I mentioned, we did do an activity on, after we went through all of this training with the organizations that participated, we did an activity where they actually went ahead and created a sample digital implementation plan. So think through your organization, your current staff capacity, and everything you've learned here. What are some things that that they would want to see their organization implement? And so thankfully, what I saw is that they were really excited to do some light lift work in terms of just like, maybe we don't have capacity, but we can at least get the information out through emails or text blasts, or, just sharing information at resource fairs with the clients that we serve, doing a general presentation. Often we see a lot of organizations who do, kind of regular community meetings to make sure that families have access to resources. If you're familiar with like promotoras or community health workers, often are leveraged in this space. And then we were really excited to see that some organizations were ready to kind of roll up their sleeves and actually build up a digital skills training curriculum and program within their, to expand on their own mission and really integrate digital equity work. So just wanted to highlight that. Through all of this work, I had the benefit of being joined by my colleagues, our senior program manager in the Bay Area, Gabby Andrada, and Los Angeles program manager, Oscar Magaña, who, supported us in this work. And these are some of the highlights of the things that we learned from the participants who took our training. So, over 87%, 87.5% indicated that they, in their opinion, their organizations who again, were not necessarily focused on digital equity or digital inclusion work, were ready to kind of step up and kind of join us in this effort to close the digital divide, which is really exciting. As I mentioned, it's an all-out effort that we all need to engage in. As I'm also happy to say that the other participants, 12.5 or so, just said maybe, that they just weren't sure that there might be some additional support that they need to be able to engage in this work. We were also happy to see that as a result of our training, respondents' understanding of what the digital divide was in the community. So what are the issues? What are some of the resources? So on and so forth, increased as a result of our training. So they had an average rating of 3.2 out of 5, which was, they had an average understanding or even basic understanding. And that jumped to 4.75 out of 5. So a majority of them indicated that our training was was very robust and provided them the information to feel really confident that they could just, give this information out to the clients and perhaps, again, carry out some digital inclusion activities on their own. And one thing specifically for those in the room who are funders or government who might be interested in supporting this type of work, 75% of them indicated that organizational capacity specifically was one of the biggest challenges in moving forward in this work. As I'm sure many of us who have experience in nonprofits know, nonprofits overall are spread relatively thin, right? They have a relatively lean staff for a lot of really, really great work in what they're doing. And so adding, the work of digital equity sometimes can be overwhelming if there's not enough staff, if there's not enough funding to be able to carry out this work. Some also indicated that it was really critical for them, that a challenge for them to engage in this work would be, how do they engage and mobilize the community that they serve to actually also become advocates for digital equity. So by sharing their own experiences and resources that they've leveraged to be able to get on the right side of the digital divide, that would really go a long ways to make sure that folks understood the importance and how critical it is to kind of jump into this effort now, given all of the funding. So one of the main things we also wanted to really get a sense of with this project and through the funding with Michelson, this partnership was, to really understand what were the key elements of how to design a digital capacity building training, if that's something that you're interested in. It could be on digital equity, it could be other things, but these are some of the five, 6 things that we really, that really stood out to us in terms of what we needed to highlight when you're thinking of providing digital capacity building training, or when you're taking a capacity building training session, like what you should be looking out for that they have considered when creating it. And so the first is, of course, understanding the end client constituent. And what we mean by that is really tailoring content to the communities that are going to be ultimately served. So you can tailor to an organization and maybe perhaps the staff, but also you must keep in mind ultimately who that staff is going to serve, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to filter down this information down to the community level to folks who might not otherwise have access to this information. Secondly, Miguel pointed this out earlier when he was speaking. It's so important to build relevance to other fields. So specifically, some things that come to mind are healthcare, education, workforce development, employment, economic, issues. It's so important to be able to make the case of like why digital equity in our case, or why capacity building for whatever it is you might be training on will impact those outcomes, because many organizations, many anchor institutions have specific missions with usually one or more of these things being the focus. And if you can make the case, then, I think it's a relatively easier lift for organizations to want to engage in capacity building towards that. The next thing would be prioritizing funding. We did see that a lot of organizations wanted to engage more in our training and just working with EveryoneOn overall, but they didn't have funding specifically set aside, or, their funding is very specific to what their current program delivery is, or their current mission. And, they felt that they couldn't make the case for using that funding or that time, that staff time towards digital inclusion. And so as all of this federal and state funding, we encourage our philanthropic partners and friends to consider, perhaps making stipends for organizations or subgrants available so that organizations can feel a little bit better about, staff time participating in these trainings for something that might not neatly fit within their current scope of work. It's also really critical to communicate the value add of the capacity training. So, if you communicate, one thing that we came across is that we had a lot of really great contacts and we reached out to them, but we were reaching out to CEOs and executive directors. And while that's great, but ultimately they're not the ones running the programs, right? So it's really important to perhaps make the case that the program folks on the ground would really benefit from hearing from organizations like ours who have been doing this work for 10 years and are practitioners on the ground as well. We have that real important sense or we have the sense that we can make the case for digital equity within the scope of their program. And I think I jumped ahead a little bit, but the last main point would be, to engage cross-functional teams within an organization. So yes, include program and service delivery staff members, but perhaps also communications team members and development policy advocacy folks, because everybody's going to walk away with a little bit of to understand a little bit of the training in our case for digital equity, and then collectively as a team, they can come together and really strategize as to how their organization might engage in any of the work. The only other thing I'll mention that I didn't put on the slide here was, it's also important to facilitate capacity building trainings in a format that's going to be engaging. And specifically, I mean, wherever possible, I would probably prefer to deliver these trainings in person. COVID definitely didn't make that easy, but it allows folks to really engage with the material, engage with everyone else in the room, and have a really robust conversation as to how we can identify and solve any challenges to engaging in this work, and also how to collaborate together. How do we all work together in this effort to, in our case, close the digital divide? And then the last thing, how is the strategy? How do we leverage this work? And why is it important? I think we've mentioned it's an opportunity to engage communities that are not currently being served by an organization like EveryoneOn, like a CETF has been mentioned, and kind of really increasing the impact. Capacity building also, of course, builds on the power of trusted community anchors such as schools, libraries, and other CBOs that folks already trust. I know that my mom, when she was trying to understand, when she first came to the country, her first stop was the school because she trusted that the school was going to give adequate and good information about whatever resources she might need, right? And so capacity building really taps into that. And then, of course, I feel like it's stating the obvious, but more individuals will be served if we all work together collaboratively and really leverage capacity building to expand the impact of, in our case, again, digital equity and digital inclusion work. And that's it for me right now.
Thank you so much, Paulina. That was a lot of great information, and much of that information will also be shared in the report, so you can really dig into some of those topics in the report as well. The link to that was shared here. We'll also share that along with the webinar content and slides with all attendees after today's event. So just to wrap up our conversation here, we'd like to hear from Cristal about the future of the digital inclusion space for the Michelson 20mm Foundation. So Cristal, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what we have already been doing and are looking forward to continuing in 2023. So at Michelson, the digital equity work falls under Digital Equity Initiative. We kicked it off around 2 years ago, and everything that we do focuses on equitable access to fast, reliable, and portable internet, with the idea in mind that it's a civil right and not a luxury. The buckets of work for us kind of fall into 5 different categories. So 4 of them are here, and then the 5th one all can pilot separately. I'm going to go through this really quickly, but if you want to learn more about it, our website is 20mm.org/digital-equity. So you can read more about all of these. And the first one is Spark Grants, which is how we've worked with EveryoneOn. So it's an annual cycle. We're actually about to open the applications for that at the beginning of 2023. So look out for an announcement. Should be coming at the very end of January. Our website has what our grant making priorities are. The asks can be up to 25K, and these are meant to fulfill an urgent need and can be used as kind of a catalyzing investment or used in conjunction with funding from other philanthropic partners. The second mechanism that we have is the Connecting California series. We just had our in-person event, which was the 10th installment of this series. And it's an ongoing speaker series that addresses some of the most pressing topics within the digital equity space, including state legislation, mapping, and cross-sector partnerships. So be on the lookout for new topics in 2023. One of the things we're thinking about is the digital equity as a social determinant of health, and then also thinking about spectrum as a natural resource within tribal communities and how that issue is being grappled with. So we're very excited to explore that further in 2023. We also are a founding partner of CADE, the California Alliance for Digital Equity. We do a lot of supporting the policy advocacy through our public policy foundation or branch. And it's a great group of folks. We encourage you to join. If I have time, I'll share my screen and show you the website for CADE, but we have weekly meetings, and then we're trying to figure out how to engage the larger audience in 2023, but it's a really great group, and we've been supporting some of the bills that were going through the cycle last year, specifically around DivCo reform, and are looking forward to some consumer protections legislation in the next session. And then the fourth one here is the Digital Equity Pooled Fund, which is what Miguel had mentioned before, so focusing on collective philanthropic action. We have some great philanthropic partners who are part of that, including the California Community Foundation, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and some of our grantees or partners are Turn and the C4AT, so Center for Accessible Technology. It's been amazing working with them, and we look forward to growing that pooled fund and seeing how we can update the focus. So the focus has been for that pooled fund around policy advocacy and ensuring that the communities that are impacted by this policy can be a part of the process of developing them, and then also of regulation. So participating in the CPUC hearings. Then the fifth bucket is the Tribal Communities Project, which we're really excited about and has been really rewarding. We've been working with some great folks from the tribal communities like Matt Rantanen, Davida Damar, Elenia Jackson from Hoopa Valley, and they've been giving us some really great insight into what the communities are needing. We've helped fund some of the tribal broadband boot camps with ILSR, and are looking forward to seeing how they scale up the boot camps and how we can be a support for that. And again, I mentioned the spectrum sovereignty topic earlier, and so that's something else that we'll be exploring further with them in 2023. And yeah, I think that covers all of the major areas. Let me just jump over to the CADE site so that y'all can see what that's like. So it's cade.nextgenpolicy.org. And we encourage you to check it out. Join. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from you all. If you have any questions about any of the projects that I mentioned, if you have ideas for collaborating, please feel free to reach out. I don't know if our contact information will be shared out, but I'll just tell you now, my email address is crystal@20mm.org. It's CRISTAL. So feel free to reach out with any questions after the webinar as well. Let me go ahead and stop.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Cristal. We'll be happy to share contact information for anybody who wants to share it with today's participants. So thank you so much, and it looks like such a bright future for digital equity within the Michelson 20mm Foundation. We do have a couple of questions here. I know that we are down to our last couple of minutes, so we'll get to, it looks like one of them that's kind of easy to respond to, and that's what ages, income levels, communities, and CBOs were included in this kind of work. I'm not sure, Paulina, that you would have the answer to all of those questions this second, or all of those factors this second, but can you share some information about that?
Yeah, so and actually I think our Russell put in the link before, but I'll mention it again now. So we did actually co-publish just a a brief report highlighting the project, and it's on our website now at everyoneon.org/digital-communities. And Russell will put the link back in the chat. And on there, you'll find the report, and actually has the list of the organizations that that participated in our training, but they supported all ages, K through 12 parents and guardians, seniors, folks who live in public housing, re-entry and returning citizens, and a few others that don't come to mind right now, but the majority of them serve individuals with household incomes of 50,000 or less, but a majority of them probably serve folks who have incomes of $30,000 per year or less. So really mostly organizations serving the folks that we're trying to reach and might not currently have access to digital equity resources. And I think I mentioned that they're primarily based out of Los Angeles and the greater Bay Area.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. There's also some questions around, or it looks like a comment around how it's been difficult getting internet providers such as AT&T, Frontier, Spectrum, and Verizon to approve households for, I'm assuming, ACP, even with the requirements being met. I mean, we know that, we hear that all over the place. I encourage you to take a look at the report. There's a link at the very bottom of that shares that goes to a toolkit. And in that toolkit, one of the resources that's available there is other organizations, nationwide organizations that provide resources and information to folks who are interested in the digital inclusion space. Joining coalitions, joining the conversation, the national conversation about ACP, about digital inclusion in general. So I encourage you all to take a look at that after today's conversation as well. And then this last question I think is a little bit more complicated, but it's are there specific partnerships with specific companies that sell digital devices to low-income persons and carrier companies that offer low-cost plans for low-income communities? So here's what I'll say about that. That's a very complex question, but here's what I'll say. Every internet service provider has the option to opt in for the Affordable Connectivity Program, which has been made available through the FCC, and each provider's requirements are different. Each organization is handling things a little differently. They have the option to be able to provide low cost or free devices or through the ACP program, and also low cost or free internet service through the ACP program as well. However, all of those are nuances that really need to be navigated by individual organizations and individual communities. And so I really recommend that you join up with local organizations, national organizations, once again, to get that information. We also have some of the information posted on our website as well. So if you go to everyoneon.org, you can get some of that information through our offer locator tool. So maybe that could be a starting point for you. So I know that we are 2 minutes over now. We lost Gladys. She's very, very busy, has got a very busy schedule. So I want to thank her. I want to thank you, Miguel and Cristal, Paulina, for all of the information that you have provided to us. Again, shout out to Russell for helping to manage our webinar today. We'll be sending over to all of our participants a robust summary of today's resources so that you all can take a look at those in addition to the slides that we shared today. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.